and gentlemen, nice to see everybody. Please check your cell phones that they are on silent. Anyone who hasn't helped themselves to something to eat or drink, please do. This week we are studying Parashat Vayigash. Vayigash, just in case you weren't following with the Chumash, this is the second to last Torah portion in the book of Genesis. So it seems like Rosh Hashanah was just a couple weeks ago. Well, it was, and it seems like we were speaking about the creation of the world and Adam and Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Well, now our main character is already Joseph. We're going to just give a quick recap of the end of last week's Torah portion and segue into this week's Torah portion to understand the great depth and lifelong lessons the Zera Shimshon is going to share with us this evening. That's how we're going to start off. And then we have a special treat of understanding New Year's, January 1st being the New Year's of the new English calendar. We'll delve into that in a similar style that we delved in to Christmas last week. Some people may love me for it, some people may hate me for it, but I'm just here to provide information. You can choose and do whatever you want with it. Okay. Last week we read about how Joseph literally went from rags to riches. Literally, from being sold as a slave, climbing up the ladder, getting put into jail, not only for 10 years, but for a total of 12 years he was in jail. He comes out of jail, and in what would seem to any onlooker in a miraculous way, he gets now elected to become the viceroy. That's the number 2 man in the most powerful and popular empire in human civilization at that time. This is, just so we have a realm, this is around 3,500 years ago. This is a good while ago. Joseph is the viceroy, and his plan and his prophecy, or at least his interpretation to Paro's prophecy, is seen to be true. There was 7 years of plenty, and they were saving. They were saving from all of the good food and all the grain. By the way, that's where the concept of taxes was introduced. Right? Most Jews, or most human beings, no one likes taxes, right? Do you know who instituted taxes to the world that we live in? It was Joseph. It was a good Jew who introduced taxes 3,500 years ago. And the realm of the tax was as follows. This was the gist of it, that every time an Egyptian citizen produced any type of grain or any type of produce, any food, 20% of it was put back in you want to call it a federal silo, however you want to, Paro's silos and his storage houses, and that was the 20% which was going to be set for the years of famine. So 7 years go by, great plenty, great wealth. There was an abundance more than regular, and that's how come 20% was a good enough amount to save for the rainy years, the bad years, the harder years, the famine years. 2 years into the famine, already the famine gets very, very strong. It's not only in Egypt, as we know, in Canaan, which would one day become Israel, also had a famine. And that was when Jacob decided to send 10 of his sons down to Egypt to procure for themselves some food, so that God forbid, they wouldn't die of starvation. We know which 10. It was all of his sons except for Joseph, which he thought was missing, and Benjamin, which was his new protected and favorite and fragile son. Sends the 10 sons down, and they come into the land of Egypt. When they come in the land of Egypt, on purpose, their father said, don't come in all from one gate. It's very overwhelming to see 10 tall, broad, strong-looking, handsome men coming from a dressed up in a non-Egyptian garb is something very intimidating. So they each came in from different locations, different entrances to the land of Egypt. They had in their own mind, they were still unsettled from the fact that their brother was sold as a slave. Where do all slaves end up back in that time? In Egypt. So at the same time when they were obeying their father's wishes of not all entering through the same doorway, through the same paths, they were also trying to snoop around, take a look out for their brother Joseph. Maybe he would be somewhere. Okay? Ironic. They were looking everywhere for him and he was right under their nose. Okay? We'll speak about that. They come in, and very quickly and swiftly, Joseph recognizes them. They don't recognize him, and he has them arrested, and he gives them the charge of being spies. Come down, and then they are all facing Joseph, and Joseph questions them, asks them, what are you doing over here? And they said very simply, we are a big family, we're from Canaan, we are here to get some food for our family so we don't die of starvation, we have an older father, and we have a missed brother, and we have a young brother at home, that's why we're only 10 over here. So then Joseph used this opportunity to say, okay, let's see if you're really saying the truth. If you're saying the truth, come back with that little brother. If not, this all sounds like a big story. So they kind of jumped the gun. Now they're really eating the words that they produced to Joseph. In their merit, they were very truthful, right? They could not say we're just 10, because then Joseph would have caught them. They were very truthful by saying one's not here, one's missing, and our father is back home. He quickly arrests Shimon, because Shimon and Levi, we know, have tremendous power together. They single-handedly or dual-handedly, just the two of them, take down the entire nation of Shechem, right? This was years ago when they defiled their sister Dinah. And he arrests Shimon and then sends the brothers home to go bring the little brother, sends them home with food. I'm doing this quite quickly. Anyone who read last week's Parashat knows what's going on. He also took the money they used to buy the food and he put them back in their bags so that when they went home, they had it. Okay. They get home, they realize they have their money, they tell their father's story. Jacob is furious. Why would you even mention about Benjamin? Why would you mention about this baby child? And they didn't have anything to say. They said, Abba, the guy was very tough with us. It looked like he was reading us almost. Again, they had no idea it was Joseph. Jacob says, I'm not sending Benjamin. My wife passed. Joseph is gone. Now you want to take also my son? You want to take my last remnants, Benjamin? Okay. Some time passes and all the food that they brought back is already finished. What are they going to do? The brothers come back to their father and say, Abba, we got to go. Okay, go get food. We need to take Benjamin with us. So Jacob agrees. Jacob agrees because Judah takes an oath and says, Abba, on my life, I promise that I will bring back not only Benjamin, but Shimon, who is incarcerated in Egypt. I will make sure that he comes home as well. But don't worry, our first priority, even if I need to enlist myself as a slave to Paro, I will make sure that Benjamin comes home to you. And this, for some reason, gave some confidence to Jacob, and Jacob said, okay, go. But go and make sure to take some of the delicacies of Israel. So some of the delicacies of Israel, some nuts and some other interesting fruits were sent as a gift by Jacob with his sons back. He said, bring back the money he gave you, bring more money, and bring even more than that. Maybe the price of food went up in the interim. Okay. Now, they get back. Everything seems great. Joseph is acting super nice to them. However, as soon as Joseph frees them all, sees and emotionally sees his brother, his full-out brother, his only full-out brother was Benjamin. As we know, he escapes, he cries, he puts himself back together. He comes back and he sees all of the brothers and he says, okay, you're free to go. He sends them off and he takes his goblet and he puts his goblet in Benjamin specifically's bag of food. On their way out to exiting the city, he sends a messenger. They go, they bring them all back, and he says, someone took my famous special goblet. Only whoever took it is going to now be my slave for eternity. So right away, and that's the beginning of this week's Torah portion, Judah gets up and he says, let it be me. No matter who is found to be the culprit of taking this goblet, let me be the person who becomes slave. And it was found in none other than Benjamin's sack. By chance, the brothers are looking at it like, oh my gosh, God is really trying to teach us a lesson for what we did to Joseph. This is literally what the brothers were thinking to themselves. And Joseph was stern, like, I don't want anyone except for that boy, because that's the boy who took it. And the brothers knew that Benjamin couldn't have taken it. Like, come on.
How old is he?
Benjamin at this time, he was a couple years younger than Joseph. He has 10 children, mind you. Benjamin is married, he has 10 children. If Joseph is 39, so he's between 35, 6, 7, he's around then. No. He's not a baby, but he's younger than the rest. And meaning he's the baby of the family, right? We know some of those, right? They're 50 years old, but they're the youngest and they're the baby of the family. Okay. Benjamin is now faced with a dilemma, but really Judah's faced with the dilemma because he took responsibility. And Judah comes up literally like a lion, ready to pounce on Joseph, telling him, back off. If you're going to have a problem with this boy, you have a problem with me. At this point, Joseph's emotions are no longer able to be contained. And we're going to read, if anyone has a chumash, you're welcome to look. We're at the beginning of chapter 45. I want to read with you 3 verses, and this is one of the most powerful verses in our complete Torah portion this week. Chapter 45, we're going to read verses 1, 2, and 3 is that main one I want to pay attention to. Chapter 45, verse 1, it says, V'lo yachol Yosef lehitapek lechol hanitzavim alav. Joseph is no longer able to contain his emotions on everything that's taken place now. Vayikrav hotziu kol ish me'alai. He calls out, everyone leave the room. I want to be alone with these people. V'lo amad ish ito bidvaday Yosef elechav. And Joseph was alone in the room with his brothers when I'm using the word confess, because he's not really the one to confess, but he's confessing by revealing himself. Okay? Next verse. Vayitenet kolo bivchi. Joseph cries out. He screams out in a cry. Vayishmu mitzrayim vayishma bet Paro. So emotional and so loud that all of Egypt heard him cry out, and even Paro and the house of Paro hears Joseph's cry. You would think they have soundproof concrete and whatnot. This penetrated through. Now listen to, again, the most important, the most heavy verse in this whole Torah portion in this week. It says as follows, Vayomer Yosef elechav, and Joseph tells his brothers, Ani Yosef, he says, I am Joseph, Ha'od avi chai, is my father still alive? Velo yachilu. Then the verse continues and says, and the Joseph's brothers were not able to, Velo yachanu echav la'anot oto ki nivalu mipanav, and the brothers were not able to even answer Joseph because they were awestruck. They were caught. Okay? The Zera Shimshon quotes a midrash. This is going to get very, very interesting. Okay? The midrash quotes a certain Talmudic scholar. His name was Abba Kohen Bardela. Not your common name, right? This Abba Kohen Bardela, the midrash recounts that every time he would read this verse, the verse we just said, again, 45:3. Every time he would read this verse, he would start crying because it was so emotional to him. And he would cry and he would say the following, woe is it to us that in comparison to Joseph's brothers, our final day of judgment is going to be very, very scary. And how so? He looks at it as Joseph being the baby brother. He's 39 years old, but he's the baby brother. The baby brother is rebuking his older brothers, and the older brothers have no words to say. They are left speechless. So then he says, Abba Kohen Bardela says, can you imagine us when God is going to rebuke us at the end of our lives? How are we going to be able to answer for ourselves? Again, he uses it as a very strong, again, kal vachomer. Is everyone familiar with what a kal vachomer is? Kal vachomer means as follows. If I can pick up a car, for argument's sake, well, obviously I could pick up a bicycle, right? That's a very basic. Now listen to the concept as applied over here. He says, if the younger brother rebukes his older brothers and they're not able to respond, okay, so that's like from a level under going upwards. Can you imagine when God, who's above us, is going to rebuke us? All the more so we will have no words to answer for ourselves for any imperfection that we brought into our lives while being here. Okay? And the Zera Shimshon says, I love the Midrash, makes a lot of sense, but what's Abba Cohen Bar Dila learning from the story of Joseph and his brothers that he's learning specific from here that we won't be able to answer God at the end of our lives? It's obvious. If God would come to you and say, why did you do X, Y, and Z? And we knew we were wrong, or even if we didn't know, we still wouldn't be able to answer. But no, the story of Joseph and his brothers really teaches us that point. That's what the Zera Shimshon's bothered with. What did Abba Cohen Bar Dila, again a Talmudic scholar, see in this story of Joseph and his brothers that only now is he like, oh, now we know we won't be able to answer God? Good question. Before he answers that question, he asks a series of 4 questions. You don't need to remember them, as always. I'll remember them for you, or I'll try to. On this verse. This verse is very specific. He really comes and he cracks down on this verse. Again, that's 45:3, chapter 45, verse 3. He asks as follows. He says, why is Joseph adding, I am Joseph, is my father alive? What's he trying to do? I'm Joseph, done. I'm Joseph, I'm your brother. Why is he saying, I'm Joseph, is my father still alive? So if you're saying that he's trying to rebuke his brothers, we all know that when you correct someone, is not the time to rebuke them. It's like, I'm Joseph, is my father still alive? Like I'm sticking it to you. Like, that's not the time to rebuke. So the Zera Shimshon wants to know, why is Joseph mentioning or asking the question within the same breath of, I'm Joseph, is my father still alive? What's he trying to accomplish by saying that? First question. Second question is, what changed from a couple moments ago till now? As soon as the brothers returned after the second time with Benjamin, the Torah tells us specifically, Joseph asks, how's your father? And they respond, he's still doing well. Right? Joseph was scared that he might not see his father ever again. So of course it was a concern for him. But what is it that changed between a couple hours ago when they came and right now when he reveals himself? They didn't have any telephones, telegrams, WhatsApp, any other type of communication. So the question seems completely irrelevant. Furthermore, if we find good reason for Joseph to ask him, why is your father still alive? He should say, Ha'od Avinu Chai. Is our father alive? Not is my father alive. He's not only his father, right? Jacob is equally each of the 12 tribes' fathers, just as to Joseph. So that's the third question. Fourth question, and this is going to be the cherry on the top. This is going to be where the Zera Shimshon pulls out his real answer for us. If someone's not able to say something, it must mean that they have, or if someone's choking up because they want to say something but they can't, it means they have something to say, right? It seems clear from the verse that Zera Shimshon is that the brothers had something to say, but they choked up out of emotion and they couldn't say it. The Zera Shimshon says, what did they want to say? Clear? That's a valid question. So listen to the following. Rashi tells us, and the Talmud also tells us, that Joseph's brothers didn't recognize Joseph. I'm going to quote you the verse. The verse is in chapter 42, verse 8. It says as follows. Vayaker, this is the first time that they come to see him. Vayaker Yosef et Echav, vehem lo hikiruhu. Joseph recognizes his brothers, and his brothers don't recognize him. Why not? Was Joseph wearing a mask? No. Did Joseph change so much in 22 years that he was no longer... I mean, Barry, if you would show me a picture of 22 years ago to today, although you may not be exactly the same, but I'd know that it's you. Maybe the way he dressed. Okay, the Talmud and Rashi tell us something else. Okay? The Talmud tells us that when Joseph left, how old was he? 17. Do most 17-year-olds have fully grown beards? No. They have a couple whiskers and maybe a little mustache. Okay? Today, Joseph is how old? He's 39 years old. He has a full beard. The Talmud and Rashi teaches us that when Joseph left, his older brothers all had fully grown beards. He didn't. Today, Joseph has a fully grown beard, and they could not recognize him. We're not staying with this, okay? Even though this is what the commentaries say, we're going to now really challenge it. Really? You know,
they couldn't tell from his eyes.
They couldn't tell by his voice, by his eyes. You know, a beard doesn't what? He was a wealthy he was a wealthy lad, and he was spoiled by his father at home also.
Exactly.
There we go. Okay, good. We have scholars in the room. Thank God. Okay, we have scholars in the room. Okay. So listen to this. When we're going to get back to the beard in a moment, and to the fact that he was able to recognize them and they weren't able to recognize him. Joseph was afraid that when he would reveal himself to his brothers, that they wouldn't believe him. Ironic, okay? How is this even possible, you may ask? When Joseph says, and this is to answer the first two questions we asked, when Joseph says, Ha'od avichai, is my father still alive, okay? This is what he was saying. He was saying, I'm Joseph. Is my father still alive? Because if you don't believe me that I'm Joseph, bring my father here. He'll recognize me. Whether it's just by my features, I'm his son, I'm not his brother, or if it's through divine intervention, Ruach HaKodesh, he will know it's me. So this is to answer the first two questions. He wasn't trying to rebuke them. He wasn't trying to make it hard for them. He was trying to say, I'm Joseph. If you don't believe me, bring our father. Our father will answer us. But then wait. So why doesn't he say our father? Why did he say my father? Okay. We have a similar pattern with another patriarch and his son. We know that Abraham and Isaac were actually identical twins. They were born 100 years apart, mind you. But they looked identical, right? Abraham was 100 when Isaac was born. They looked identical. Remember, it was Abraham who requested from God to age, because he wanted people to know who's the father, who's the son. Right? We spoke about this before. It's all thanks to Abraham. We could all thank Abraham when we look in the mirror and we're starting to bald and we're starting to have gray and white hair and wrinkles and all of that. Okay? We could thank Abraham for that. But along with that comes, prestige, age, honor, respect. Okay, we're not speaking about that tonight. So they were twins. Mind you, Jacob and Joseph were also identical. Of course, one looked a little grayer or wrinklier than the other. However, there was 91 years difference of age, a little different than the previous two, but they still looked identical. So look at what the Zera Shimshon says. The Zera Shimshon says, he says, Ha'od avi chai, is my father still alive? What's wrong with you, brothers? I look exactly like Abba. If you can't recognize me because of the whole beard situation, well, now that I have a beard, I look like my father, so you should even more recognize me. You hear? That's the Zera Shimshon. It's very nice, right? Did you get that? If you didn't recognize me because I have a beard now, well, the fact that I have a beard now makes me look like a carbon copy of my father. Maybe with black hair instead of gray or white hair, but I look exactly like my father. I look like him. Okay. Now to answer beyond that, it was not in the conception, it was not part of the brothers' lexicon that this individual in front of them is their younger brother. If all signs would be pointing, a shooting star shooting out and writing out or singing, Joseph is the man in front of you, they wouldn't have believed it. Why not? Because in their eyes, it was their little brother who was a dreamer, who was sold as a slave and had almost no probabilities of still being alive today. Okay? And the Zera Shimshon then explains that Joseph told them who he was. Till a moment before he said that, they had no idea it was Joseph. Now he says, I'm Joseph. They recognize him instantly, right away, and they believed him. But they were speechless. So what did they have to say that they couldn't? You know what the Zera Shimshon wants to say they had to say? They wanted to say very simple words. You're right. We are or better yet, we were wrong. We were wrong all along. 22 years ago, when we sold you as a slave, as a young child, when we were giving you a hard time, when we were mocking your dreams, when we gave up hope on you, when we turned against you, when we sat down as a bet din, as a judicial court, and ruled against you, we were wrong. You were right. And this is something that Zera Shimshon says are the hardest words a human being can ever say. Now, I don't want to make this too personal, but the hardest words I'm able to tell my wife are, "You're right," or "I'm wrong." And we can all say the fact to our wife, to our husband, to our child. The hardest word to say is, "I'm wrong," and "you're right." Okay? Because that means you messed up in your calculation, you made the wrong decision, and now you have to own up to it. And that is the difference between a mature individual, someone looking to grow, someone looking to own up to their mistakes, or the opposite. Yeah, quickly?
Quickly, but shouldn't they, with emunah that they would have in Hashem, shouldn't they know that this was all part of the
Oh, so this all hits them 100%, Jacob. This hits them like a ton of bricks, just knocking them out. Everything you hit the nail on the head. In this millisecond of when Joseph says, "I'm Joseph, is my father still alive?" the past 39 years, meaning Joseph's life, flies through the brothers' minds. And every instant they're going through, we were wrong, he was right, we were wrong, right. Every single instant of his life. Because it all came overwhelmingly down on them that they messed up. And the Zera Shimshon says they couldn't come to articulating the words, "We were wrong, you are right." They couldn't. It was so hard for them. The Zera Shimshon says this is what that Talmudic sage, Abba Cohen Bardila, meant by from the story of Joseph. He learns and he is very scared for us on the time of our passing when we face God. Because we'll be stuck. We would have lived a whole life with certain goals, aspirations, benchmarks, milestones. And then comes the end of our life and Hashem shows us what we could have become, what we should have become, what we've become. What we did wrong, what we did right, and we could have done more of and less of. And he'll say, "Answer for yourself, my child." And you know what? We will be embarrassed and have nothing to say. That's what this Talmudic sage is learning from the story of Joseph and his brothers. If Joseph's brothers couldn't answer their younger brother on a 39-year span of mistake that they made, how could any one of us answer God and not be completely embarrassed, bashful, to tell God, "You're right, I'm wrong"? This is what the Zera Shimshon is telling us we have to learn from the story of Joseph. I want to take it a step further. We've learned before, I think we've learned, almost all of us have partook in the classes on Pirkei Avot, the teachings of our fathers. We learned, I think it's in the 4th chapter, it says, Ezu chacham ha-ro'eh et hanolad. There's a couple different options, but one type of wise person is someone who sees what's going to become, sees what's going to be. You see what's going to be born, you see the outcome, you see the results, you see whatever is going to happen. We are here today. We are speaking about the shame we will have or might have when we face our Creator. Why wait and put ourselves in that situation if we can start trying to fix up ourselves now and prepare for that time? Right? We always think about repentance and answering up for ourselves in the time of Elul, before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Yes, we have a mini day of judgment dedicated for one whole day every single year of our lives. But we have more than that. That is like a trial, that's like a speck of what's going to be at the end of our lives. At the end of our lives, we will be judged on every little thing we ever did. And why should we put ourselves in that embarrassing, bashful situation where we will not be able to answer for ourselves. Right? We go on through life rationalizing, coming up with excuses for ourselves. Boy, are we good at that. But what's going to be? Could we pull any of that shtick on God? No, we can't. So, Ezu Chacham Harot Anolad, who's a wise person, someone who sees what's going to be? See that we're going to have to enter that courtroom at the end of our lives. Let's start preparing our case that will have good answers for ourselves for that time. That's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to say is that at the time of our life, at the end of our life, when we do face our Creator, the world that we lived in will be as clear as anything to us. And that's what will cause that embarrassment. It's the fact that it's going to be so clear to us that we were so wrong. Just as Joseph's brothers were so wrong, it was like clear that nothing to say. They were speechless. They were spellbound because it was so clear to them. So too for us. It's so fuzzy in our lives nowadays. What's the right thing to do? What do I spend more time on? What do I focus on? Where do I give my charity? Where do I spend my time? Which child is right? Which employee is right? Are my parents right? Am I right? Is my sister right? Am I right? Who knows? It's all ambiguous. It's all fuzzy nowadays. We just need to try our best, because then we could come to God and say, hey, we tried my best. I did it. I gave it my all. And God will know if you genuinely did or not. And then we'll have an answer, because it will be super clear as day, as they say, right? Only then. So no, go through life knowing that it is fuzzy, it is not very clear in the life that we live in the world that we live in today, but know that all God wants for us to do is put in our greatest effort towards making the best with whatever lot He gave us. Moving on to the second of our Torah for the Zera Shimshon this evening. So chapter 45, I'm in verse 4 now, right where we left off. And Joseph tells his brothers, come close. His brothers were very scared. Can you imagine your brother now, your younger brother who you slighted, who you intended to kill, who you ended up selling as a slave, is now the most powerful person or the second most powerful person in the world. It's a time of famine, and you're standing in his lion's den. Okay? Did I give you a good enough picture? Okay. You're standing there, and he just tells you he's that younger brother that you took advantage of. What's your initial reaction, besides for being speechless, is you are very, very scared. He could just go and off with the heads, or off to the lions, however you want to say it. They were very scared. And Joseph saw them starting, you could tell by their body language, that they started taking steps back and were becoming very, very, breaking a sweat to say the least. And Joseph reassures them and says, come closer, my brothers. And he reassures them that he will not ever take revenge on them. That it wasn't their doing that they ended up here. Rather, it was all orchestrated from God. And he was happy of how it played out, although it was hard in the interim. He accepted it, and he bears no grudge. According to many of the commentaries, he also promised to never reveal the secret to their father. As some of the commentaries point out, Jacob was trying to, after he comes and he moves to Egypt, we'll speak about in a moment, he tried to kind of corner Joseph and try to get him alone to ask him, hey son, what really happened? And Joseph, keeping the oath he made to his brothers, never allowed himself to be alone with his father, to never give his father the opportunity to ask that question. Look how righteous, what a great man Joseph was. He never wanted to throw his brothers under the bus. Okay? He reassures them. He brings them close. They all hug and cry. He gives them gifts. He gives each one a wagon full of food for their own family, and then he sends to his father a subsequent 10 wagons of the greatest delicacies of Egypt, namely old and aged wine, and then another 10 wagons full of food, personally for Jacob and his immediate household. And he sends them back and he tells them, go back, tell our father that I'm alive and that I'm inviting you to all move down here during this time of famine, God forbid, so you should not perish. Okay? Sends them home. And this is one of the very famous Rashis on the Chumash. It's actually learned from the Talmud, but everyone always asks, so what? So I'm going to give you the interpretation, and the Zera Shimshon does like everyone else. So what? Listen to this. Okay? I'm in chapter 45, verse 27, if anyone wants to follow. That's 45:27, says as follows. Vaidabiru alav, so they come, the brothers come to Jacob, they tell him that Joseph is alive, they tell him the whole story, and then Vaidabiru alav et kol divrei Yosef, they said, and asher diber lehem, everything that Joseph said to them. He still wasn't convinced, believe it or not. He didn't really believe Joseph was alive, like it's been 22 years. Vayar et ha'agalot, and then Jacob lifts his eyes and he sees the wagons that Joseph sent him. Asher shalach Yosef laset oto, all of the gifts and to carry him down, to bring him down. Vatichi ruach Yaakov avihem, and then Jacob's spirit was uplifted. Jacob now was given back the gift of divine providence. He was lacking it out of his depression and his sorrow for the past 22 years, but he was given back to it. Why? Because he saw those wagons. When you see wagons, you believe your sons that your other son is still alive? Okay, so to make stuff more complicated, great. Rashi and the Talmud tell us that you know what the last topic, out of all topics, there's 613 mitzvot and each one has multiples of derivatives. Okay, the last topic Jacob was learning with his son Joseph was, I'll say it in Hebrew, I'll translate it, I'll briefly tell you what it's about, and then you'll say, so what? Just like everyone else does. They were learning about the concept in Hebrew, it's called egla arufa. Okay, it means a young calf's breaking of the neck. I'll tell you what it's about, but you know what the correlation is? Is that wagon in Hebrew is agala, and agala sounds like egla arufa, right? It all sounds alike, okay, maybe. And because of that, Jacob knew that Joseph is alive. He's sending a sign that, Abba, let's pick up where we left off learning, and I'm still righteous, and my head is still in learning, and in learning Torah and fulfilling mitzvot. Really? Okay, so let's understand what this whole idea of an egla arufa is briefly. Back in the day, in the time when sacrifices were being still administered, there was a certain case, and the case was of an individual who was traveling to or from a town, and he was found dead. Just murdered. In any way possible. Could have been an animal, could have been a person, could have been a bad trip. They could have drowned, whatever the case is. At that point, the local bet din, the rabbinical court, would come out and measure what's the closest city to this person. Because they are at fault. You know why they're at fault? Because they were not hospitable. They lacked in their hospitality. And if they would have taken him in, let him sleep the night, or escorted him out to the next city, or given him food so he doesn't die of starvation, he wouldn't have died. So it's their fault, and now they need to come bring a calf and break the calf's neck, initially killing it, at that place as a means of atonement for their lack of consideration and hospitality for this individual. Okay? This was the last topic Jacob taught his son, not knowing that would be the last topic, but that was the last thing that they were learning about when Joseph was kidnapped and sold as a slave. So Joseph is sending wagons, agalot, which reminded or supposed to hint to his father about the last thing, egla arufa, that they were learning. So the Zera Shimshon says, was it by chance that was the last thing that they were learning? And what type of hint is Joseph sending his father? So what? And Joseph is did he send a card like, hey dad, this is a similar word, this carriage is a similar word to the last thing we were learning, and this is a hint to, is that what he did? Okay, so listen to how the Zera Shimshon answers this in a beautiful, beautiful way. He says as follows. The Talmud tells us that there's a certain reason why this person passed away. We said it was a lack of hospitality, but the Talmud takes it a step further. He says it was because of the stinginess of that city. The inhabitants of that city were so stingy that they didn't give the person food or shelter, and that's why he died. It's a lesson. The whole concept of this calf that his neck is broken based on the finding of a dead person is all a lesson in teaching us how severe stinginess really is. Okay, that's what the Talmud says. Then the Zera Shimshon moves on and he says, the Zohar teaches us something very interesting. The Zohar tells us that if the Jewish people would have never eaten from the bread of the Egyptians, they would have never been enslaved and tortured. Okay, we're going to analyze that again. If the Jews would have never eaten from the bread of the Egyptians, Egyptian bread, right? We know that there's Temani bread, there's pita, there's lafa, there's French baguette. Okay? If the Jews would have not eaten, I'm putting in quotations, Egyptian bread, then they would have never been enslaved. It would have never happened. Okay? Why? Because the bread of the Egyptians was stingy. How do I know? You know what they fed them? Matzah! I know it's a couple months away and a couple months back and we are not looking forward to it, but they ate matzah. You know what matzah is? It's a poor man's bread. It's stingy bread. No eggs, no additives, no time to let it rise. Literally.
Except
And
for matzah.
okay, still. Okay, so you know what? If we would have never eaten from it, we would have never been subjugated to them. Okay? You know what the Zera Shimshon says Joseph was doing? Joseph was sending an invitation to his father and family, saying, guys, you're in a famine, come move down here. He didn't want his father to reject that invitation, right? That would be something very embarrassing. So you know what he said? He said, Dad, don't worry about this exile. Joseph, the Zera Shimshon says, was very timely and time-sensitive in this message he was sending, in this hint, through the wagons, and we'll tie it all together. But he was telling them, guys, come down to Egypt, and don't be worried that this exile will overtake you, because I'm telling you the secret to not let it take control of you. Don't eat from the Egyptians' bread. And again, we're going to explain what that means. Rather eat from my bread. The verse says, in chapter 45, verse 11, it says, V'chilkalti otecha sham, and I will sustain you. Joseph is telling him, come down and eat from my bread. Why? Because Joseph knew the dangers of his family eating from the bread of Egypt. Because when they eat from the bread of Egypt, then they are going to now be subjugated to them. So now you're looking at me like, Rabbi, it's just bread. Who cares? So it's very good. So listen to how King David explains the importance of bread, or of eating from someone else's bread. I'm quoting to you in Tehillim 37:25, and we actually say this in Birkat HaMazon. We say, Nar ha'iti gam zakanti, velo ra'iti tzadik ne'ezav, v'zar'o mevakesh lachem. Let me translate that for you. It says as follows. I was young, I was also aged, and I have not seen a righteous man forsaken, and his seed seeking bread. Which means that a person who seeks bread is none other than abandoned. A person who does not have bread, which we still have not explained what that is yet, is still, unfortunately, abandoned. Listen to the opposite. Listen to the way someone should refer to their bread, or where their bread should come from. Again, Tehillim, chapter 136, verse 25 says as follows. Noten lechem lechol basar ki leolam chasto. We're praising God and saying, He who gives bread to all flesh, for his kindness is eternal. So listen to the way Zera Shimshon explains. When a person is relying on someone else for their bread, for their sustenance, for their livelihood, for their source, for their security, you know what you're initially doing? You're abandoning God. Whether mindfully or not, you are abandoning God when you put in your trust that your source of bread is coming from this person, or this nation, or this job, or even your own strength or wisdom. Rather, you know who is not abandoning God? It's when they understand noten lechem lechol basar ki leolam chasdo, that it is God who gives bread to all flesh. When you put your trust in God, when you put your belief in God, then you are doing everything but abandoning Him and staying steadfast in your trust that He'll be the one that provides. Comes Zera Shimshon and says, you know why the Jewish people degenerated so low? It's because they started eating from Egyptian bread. Yeah, although Egyptian bread is really matzah, but it's more than that. They put their trust that their food, their livelihood, their sustenance, their existence was coming from Egypt. Joseph warned them. He said, eat from my bread, because my bread is God's bread. Because when I'll give it to you with that lesson. They started off that way. Joseph did everything. He let them live in Goshen. He didn't want them to live near Paro. He didn't want them to get indoctrinated and assimilate into the Egyptian culture. But they failed. As soon as Joseph's brothers and Joseph passed away, that whole generation passed over, then everyone started eating from the bread of their culture, of their entertainment, of their morals, of what was regular and normal for them. Joseph warned them. You know how he warned them? He hinted to them with the wagons. He said, you know what the last thing I learned with my father was? It was a lesson of stinginess. It was a lesson in that eglah rufab, which was a source of stinginess. Same thing, don't eat from the stingy bread of the Egyptians, because the stingy bread of the Egyptians now subjugates you to their law, to their rulership. Don't do that. To us, this is a tremendous lesson. The Zera Shimshon, by the way, finishes off in saying, you know why the Jews actually did emerge Egypt? Was when they realized and they put their trust and their faith back into God. That's what got them into their problems over there, and that's what got them out. As being 3,500 years after Joseph, 3,300 and change after the giving of the Torah, after the Exodus, we are to learn the same lessons. When we take and we remove our faith and trust in God and we put it in something else, what we're doing is abandoning God. That's a scary feeling. It's scary to be abandoned by God. The problem is we don't realize we're abandoning Him, but He does that to us because we're doing that to Him. So what we have to make sure is not allow our faith and our trust in God to dwindle, because by doing that we're actually bringing on tremendous ramifications of literal abandonment. And that's something very scary. Rather, we need to know that it's not our paycheck, it's not our boss, it's not our investment, it's not our portfolio manager, it's not our customers that is providing for us. We need to, as obviously, provide for ourselves. We need to try our hardest, put our effort into it. But the blessing comes from God. When we realize that, we're doing everything but abandoning God. We're bringing Him into our lives, bringing blessing into our lives. Isn't that what we all want? I see the heads nodding up and down. That's all we want, right? We want to work not so hard, make a lot, have healthy families, happy families, and do great, right? Isn't that perfect? Is that almost like the American dream? It's really what God wants from us. It's what He wants to do for us. As long as we focus on where it's coming from, it will come everywhere. Hashem will let it come from all places. Hashem tests us to see if we really believe that it's coming from Him and not from anywhere else. This is a tremendous lesson we learned that Joseph was trying to impart onto his brothers, onto his children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, that they failed, and what led to the tremendous oppression and torture that the Egyptians administered to us. Again, all from the concept of stingy bread. It was that stingy fellow who didn't take in that person that passed away, that eglah urufa was then sacrificed, to the stingy bread of Egyptians. I'm going to also say one more thing on this because I can't hold myself back. One has to be careful who they take from or who they accept from, because you automatically now become owned, you could say owned, subservient, ruled over by that person. And therefore, The only way to avoid that is to make it very clear to yourself and even to that person that it's not them who is providing for you, it's God. You have the choice to be a conduit, you have a choice to be a messenger or not, but everything comes from God. By the way, you've in at least one time in your life entered a store and the salesman or the more likely the store owner, whether being Jewish or Christian or just a down-to-earth person, when they look you in the eye and they say, I don't care if you buy or not. My livelihood all comes from above. It strikes a chord. And you know what? You most of the time end up buying because they say that. But if the person is really genuine when they say that to you, it strikes a chord. Make sure in your life, you kind of have to take. You have to take either from your employer, from your spouse, from your customers, from your supporter, for whoever it is, you end up taking from them. But when you make it very clear that you truly believe that everything that comes your way is from God, then you're not allowing yourself to be subjugated to them and allow them to rule over you. That's what I wanted to leave you with on that point. Okay. We are short on time, so we're not going to say over the third Zera Shimshon piece right now. Maybe tomorrow, the next day, I'll do it online and I'll send it to all of you. I wanted to speak about a date in the year similar to last week's date. It's, I guess, God sent, Mina Shamayim, that our Wednesday night class happened to fall out not only on the 25th of December, but also on the 1st of January. And I guess also God ordained it to be that last night was the celebration, so this way anyone who hears what I'm about to say, if I would have said it yesterday and then you would have still went out to party, then maybe you would have thought twice about it. So I'm saying it now. You have 364 and a half days to decide what you're going to do next year. And I'm doing this out of courtesy to your decision because, unfortunately, the New Year celebration is maybe ingrained in a lot of our upbringing. But we're soon going to see, like I said last week, you'll make your own decision after I present you the next max 8 to 10 minutes. Okay? In the year 46 BCE, that's before the Common Era, there was a Roman emperor named Julius Caesar. We are very familiar with this individual. Okay? He was the first person to ever establish January 1st as the New Year's, as the year starting anew. Why would he do so? Okay, listen to this. There was a Roman god, pagan god, named Janus. Okay? No hard feelings. Janus was the god of doors and gates. And he had two faces, one facing this way, one facing that way, which alluded to, as Julius Caesar alluded to or understood it, as looking at last year and upcoming year all at the same time, meaning he's the god of doors and gates. This is the gate, the door of a new year. Okay? And he felt it that since January is named after, in their belief, the god of Janus, so the first of the month of January named after this god is an appropriate time for it to be the beginning of the calendar year. This was, again, in 46 BCE. Okay. So Caesar felt that this would make sense. January 1st was a celebration, and it was dedicated in the name or in the sake of this pagan god. So what did the first New Year's party back then look like? Okay, again, this is over 2,000 years. Again, it would be 2,066 years ago. Okay? What did it look like? So it looked like Caesar ordered violent rioting over the Jewish forces in the Galilee. Okay? The Jewish troops that set foot and encampment in Galilee, he sent rioting and ended up murdering most of them. And as eyewitnesses from back then recount, the streets were flowing in Jewish blood. Okay? Let's move on. Years later, the pagans celebrated by engaging in drunken orgies, which isn't so different from today. As we know, New Year's today in many places is a lot of careless drinking, partying, dancing, and wildness, where there's a lot of, especially in very busy areas, police enforcement out there. In 1845, the NYPD was formed in response to this time of the year's wild and careless behavior. Okay? As Christianity spread, and pagan holidays were either, as we said last year, incorporated or completely disqualified and abandoned, by the early medieval period, most of Christianity regarded Annunciation Day as New Year's. Now, if you don't know what Annunciation Day, that's great, but I'll tell you what it is. Most Jews maybe don't know what it is. Annunciation Day is as follows. It was the day that, in Christian belief, that Gabriel the angel came to Mary and told her that she is impregnated from God and that she will have a son named Jesus. This happened on March 25th. So until this day, until medieval times, all Christianity, besides for that wacko Julius Caesar, who again was part of a pagan cult, or pagan religion if you want to call it, all Christianity always said it to be Annunciation Day, March the 25th, as the beginning of a new year. Okay, so what changed? As pagans started as follows. Has anyone ever heard of William the Conqueror? Okay. Or more appropriately known as William the Bastard. Okay. He was the King of England. And he was coronated as king December 25th of 1066. His decree was to return. So up until that date, his decree was to return the new year from being March 25th to January 1st, similar to Julius, the Roman Caesar. That's one of the decrees he wanted. Why did he want it that way? He wanted it for the following reason. He wanted to align his day of coronation with Jesus' birth, December 25th, which we all know and he probably knew wasn't true. But he wanted to, since that happened to be the day that he was elected as king, he wanted that day to be in correlation to Jesus' birth. And the day of Jesus' circumcision, which would be 8 days later, which would be January 1st, he wanted that to be the beginning, the start of a new year, being right after he was coronated. So he wanted some alignment between Jesus and himself, proving how he's a very chosen and special individual. So he went back and he decided that all the calendars, all English and Christian calendars, would now hold, from 1066 and on, would hold that January 1st would be the start of a new year. Unfortunately for William, his innovation was eventually rejected, and after he passed away, all Christianity went back to March the 25th being the new year. So just to give a recap before we get a little closer, the January 1st was originally celebrated as a pagan holiday in celebration of the god of doors and gates, Janus. And then William the Bastard tried making it to become January 1st in correlation and alignment with his coronation, and that got rejected after he passed away. Okay. 500 years later, in more recent history, in 1582, one of the most vicious anti-Semites that the world has ever seen, his name was Hugo Bon Compagnie. Heard of him? You maybe heard of his other name, as known as Pope Gregory XIII. He was one of the most vicious anti-Semites the world has ever seen. He abandoned the traditional Julian calendar, and he claimed that there were some miscalculations. As we know, you cannot go only with a solar year or with a lunar year, so that's why the Jewish calendar makes most sense. We have approximately 29 and a half days per month. That's the easiest way to do it. So how do you do it? So you have something 29, 30, 29, 30. You have a leap year every 3 or 4 years. That's the way we have our calendar. The Pope Gregory the 13th, he said we got to do away with the Julian calendar, and we're going to now institute, famously known, the Gregorian calendar, which happens to be the calendar we still use today in America or most parts of the world. Okay. He made 3 changes to the Julian calendar. The first 2 have nothing to do with us. It has to do with the calculation ramification. The third change does have some interest to us. And the third change was that he was officially proclaiming the start of a new year, January 1st. Okay? So now, if we want to get into the spirit of really celebrating New Year's, let's see how this great Pope Gregory the 13th celebrated his New Year's. Listen to a couple of facts, historical facts. Number 1, on New Year's Day in 1577, Pope Gregory the 13th decreed that all Roman Jews, by pain of death, must listen attentively to compulsory Catholic conversion sermons given in Roman Jewish synagogues after Friday night services. So imagine this. You're living in a small town, and after Friday night services, which may or may not have a kiddush, okay, very nice. Sermon, yes sermon, no sermon, everyone is in there. You are forced to a conversion ceremony delivered by a bishop to you, your spouse, and your children. And you had to be there. You weren't there, you were found elsewhere, you were killed. Okay, this is something that he instituted. Now, he was just getting warmed up because the following year he signed a tax law that all Jews in Rome were taxed for a special, let me quote it for you, it was called as follows, a house of conversion tax, which means he started getting the Jews to pay for the bishops who were coming in on their Friday nights, after their Friday night services, to pay them for their conversion sermon, their Catholic conversion sermon. So could you imagine having all your children, they're in Jewish day school all week long, you're spending tons of money on that, raising them in our heritage and our faith and our tradition, and Friday night they're trying to brainwash us, they're forcing us to brainwash ourselves to learn about Catholicism. And this is all done by Pope Gregory the 13th. In 1581, on New Year's Day again, Gregory orders his troops to confiscate all Jewish literature belonging to the Jewish communities, including Torah scrolls, copies of the Talmud, and all other Jewish literature. Some of the Jews weren't so enthusiastic about this decree, so they put up a fight, and anyone who put up a fight was murdered in a gruesome, horrible way. Thousands of Jews were killed on that day. And it became a pattern all the way throughout history and medieval times and in Europe and until quite recent, not to the world or the years that we live in, but until the previous century. January 1st, along with December 25th, as we said last week, were days which were dedicated to uprisings against Jews, pogroms, spilling blood of the Jews, confiscating their women, children, literature, Torah scrolls. Horrible, horrible, horrible days. And this was all on account of either a celebration for a pagan god or for who was the next individual? Or, who was that other one? Or, yeah, basically, or William the Bastard, or the King of England, or Pope Gregory the 13th, all which were tremendous anti-Semites. So, I may be coming out a little harsh, but when someone goes over to someone else and tells them, Happy New Year, or they have a l'chaim, a toast, isn't that quite ironic? You're having a l'chaim, a toast to life, on the same night or the same day that for centuries was dedicated to the opposite of life for our ancestors. And I'll give the same analogy as I said last week. I'll say it a little more precise. I think it's April 20th. April 20th was Hitler's birthday. And can you imagine, like I said last week, if in 100 years from now, people start forgetting exactly what happened in the Holocaust, and then there's a day called Hitler Day, and it's April 20th, and everybody is celebrating Hitler Day. Even your own Jewish great-grandchildren. And they're walking around with little dolls with these ridiculous mustaches and these cute little signs on them, which were swastikas, God forbid. Okay? What would you tell your great-great-grandchildren if they'd be toasting themselves to a Hitler Day celebration? We are doing absolutely no different by celebrating in any iota on New Year's. Now, this is really tough for us because just like it was tough for the Jews in Egypt to recognize God, well, we live in America, our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents, we all grew up staying up till midnight, till the ball hits the floor, until the lights go crazy, until the music comes, until the champagne is poured. But that's quite ridiculous. I actually make it a point to be sleeping by midnight last night every year. I'll do, at all costs, I will make sure I'm sleeping because there is absolutely nothing to be excited about. If anything, it should be a mourning period for the Jews. So this is something to think about. Maybe I'll try to just cut out this last 10 minutes of the clip and try to resend that to you next year on December 31st, okay? But it's something we really need to remind ourselves, not allow ourselves to assimilate. People don't know these facts. We're not, God forbid, anyone who wishes you Happy New Year or Good New Year or whatever it is, or Merry Christmas even, they probably did not hear the last 10 minutes of last week's class or the last 10 minutes of this class. So don't hold it against them. But I can guarantee you next time you want to either say Merry Christmas or Happy New Year, if you actually could bring yourself to saying those in a genuine way, you're gonna stop and say, whoa, Rabbi Laredo. At least my face is gonna come in your mind and say, Rabbi Laredo said not to do that, and he gave me good proof not to do that. But make your own decision, and just consider that analogy of April 20th on Hitler Day in 100 years from now, God forbid. May we be blessed. May we be healthy, happy, successful with our families, but make sure to keep our eye on the ball and focus on what matters, and don't let us get distracted from the world, the society, the culture, the entertainment that we live with. May the merit of the Zera Shimshon be with us. May we see us all, B'ezrat Hashem, next week, same time, same place, for the last Torah portion of Genesis. Questions? Shana Tova. Okay, any questions?